This is why I give money to nonprofits. After the Civil War, by act of Congress, the first peacetime authorization of blacks into the U.S. military was authorized. One group of black soldiers was in Kansas. Their commander was a white lieutenant, William Harmon. While he was in Kansas fighting the Indian Wars with these black soldiers, called Buffalo Soldiers by the Indians, his wife was effectively raising their children alone in Lebanon, a small town in southwest Ohio. One of his children was Elmer Harmon, and he loved to play on the playgrounds in Lebanon, Ohio. Now, with his dad off fighting the war, they didn't have a lot of money, so when he wanted to go to college and become a doctor, they couldn't afford the tuition. So then he went ahead and married, and unfortunately about a year later his wife died. Then shortly thereafter his mother died. He needed to get work, so he took a job with his uncle in real estate. Now, as the years unfolded and the decades passed, he became quite successful. So he started thinking about what to do with his estate. And he knew what it was like to have no money. So he could easily have given it all to his children. But he remembered playing on that playground in Lebanon, Ohio, and how much fun he had. So he said, geez, I'd kind of like to give some money away, but he wasn't quite sure where or how. So he tried an experiment. He bought some land in southwest Minnesota, in a town called Pipestone, which is my hometown, gave those 4 acres to the town of Pipestone, and then gifted enough money to convert that into a playground. Then he set up a foundation called the Harmon Foundation to give money to black painters, black artists, black actors, because he'd heard his dad brag about how great those black soldiers were. They were skilled, they were strong, they were organized, they were smart. And he wanted to support the blacks. And he sat back and watched what happened, and he liked what he saw, so when he passed away, he set aside enough money to fund 199 playgrounds in 32 states, and a substantial endowment to the Harmon Foundation to support black actors, authors, and painters for a long time. Now, I grew up in Pipestone, Minnesota, and my sister and I played thousands of hours on that playground. But that playground was built 90 years ago, because Harmon was doing this in 1922 and 1924, well before anybody started thinking about these things. So by 2010, that playground, Harmon Playfield, was old. It was dilapidated. There were so many gopher holes in the playground you couldn't really play on it. So the city of Pipestone, the Pipestone Community Foundation, sat down and said, how do we get this thing fixed? And they started collecting money, and they got 3 donations of over $10,000, a couple dozen of between $1,000 and $10,000, several hundred between $100 and $1,000, and thousands of donations between $1 and $99. And all these nickels and dimes added up to $238,000. Then when the contractors came out to start fixing this playground, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and children showed up with work boots and gloves on and said, put me to work. And they could paint the fences, put up the flagpoles, put up the signs, fill all those golfer holes, dig the trenches. And the contractors today will say that they probably saved $238,000 in labor costs because of all this volunteer work. Today, there's a brand new playground in Pipestone for the next generation to play in. So, what's the moral of this history lesson? One thing that I've noticed as a financial advisor is something that we seldom talk about. But the longer you're in the business, the more you see people die. I've had well over 600 clients die. I've dealt with well over 2,000 heirs. So I've got to see what few people get to see, which is what happens to your money when you're gone. Now, out of all those heirs I've seen, about 68% of the time, which is this classic one standard deviation, either side of the mean, 2/3 of the universe, about 2/3 of the time there's 3 heirs. Not all the time, but most of the time there's 3 heirs. Not all the time, but most of the time, one of those heirs will take the entire inheritance and just pay off the creditors. Pay off the mortgage, pay off the credit cards, pay off the auto loans, pay off the home line security, pay off the pool loan, pay off the student loans, pay off all the debt, and that part of the estate's gone. The second heir, many times, will spend it all within 3 years. And I've seen people spend $1 million a month and go through the entire inheritance in less than a year. And the third heir, 2/3 of the time, simply adds it to their net worth. And I can guarantee you, and you get very few guarantees out of people these days, but this one I can, that I've never yet seen one heir where if they inherited $9 instead of 10, or 900 instead of 1,000, or 9,000 instead of 10,000, or 90 million instead of 100 million, that it would have mattered at all. It wouldn't have moved the needle. They wouldn't have cared. But that 10% of an estate, the dollar, the $9, the $10, the $1,000, the 10 million, that 10%, that little sliver, if it goes to the nonprofits, that matters immensely. It mattered to Harmon Playfield. It mattered to me who could play on that playfield. It matters to places like St. Cloud State University and Southwest State University of Minnesota and ASU when it comes to providing scholarships so that people can become doctors or whatever they dream to be. It matters immensely to the Pipestone Performing Arts Centers and the rabbis and the synagogues and the churches and the little leagues, because in my observation, we do have somewhat of a civil war breeding in our country, and it's a lack of civility. And my observation has been that it's the nonprofits, the playgrounds of the world, the arts, the performing arts, the actors, the authors, the little leagues, the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, that preach and teach and exhibit the skill sets that we need for a civil society. And if there's any gift any of us can give to children, grandchildren, and all the future generations, is a civil society. The heirs aren't going to miss the 10%. The nonprofits will. I believe strongly the nonprofits are keeping us civil and working towards civilizing humans. And that's why I believe giving to the nonprofits is so important.